So tonight, we have an opportunity to journey with Jesus. And I want you to be able to think about this for a moment. Jesus knew that this was the night that he was going to be betrayed. We've already heard it in the passages so far as Jesus was talking about it. He said, someone is going to betray me. You see, I always wonder, though, was Jesus just talking about Judas? Because what we do know is that most of the disciples are going to betray Jesus. Most of the disciples are going to walk away from Jesus when it gets difficult. But before we even get there, let's talk about this journey to the upper room. You see, Jesus had gathered his disciples. He said, disciples, this is the night we are going to celebrate the Passover together, and we are going to meet in this upper room. The upper room was kind of like a banquet center. It was a place where it's kind of special. And so Jesus says, come, gather from all around, and we're going to take this journey. We're going to go to this nice place and be able to celebrate the Passover together. But the journey to the upper room, probably filled with all kinds of roads. And it wasn't usually the occasion that most of the streets that they would be walking on to get to the upper room would have been filled with dust and dirt and grime. And you see what happens is when they get to the upper room, usually customary, as it would say, is that somebody's usually waiting at the door as people come in to be able to wash feet. Why? Because just like I said, everybody walked. If you needed to get someplace, you weren't going to travel by car. You were going to use your feet. That was the reason why there would always be someone at the door, a servant, to be able to wash the feet, because they also, when they sat at a table, they didn't use chairs, they reclined. Now, if you're thinking about it, how do you recline? Well, usually you got your feet out, and chances are your feet were going to be near someone else who was also reclined at the table. Now, think about the dirt, the dust, the grime that are on the feet of these disciples who are reclined at the table because no one washed their feet on the way in. That's what I want you to be able to see. So first, when we look at John chapter 13, and this is verses 4 and 5. Right, and so it says that Jesus, knowing the Father had given all things, all right, so he goes to verse 4, and he rose from supper, right, so they were already eating. That's what I want you to be able to see. It was already them reclining at the table. Nobody had washed their feet when they came through the door. They were reclining at the table. Jesus rose during supper, and he laid aside his outer garments. Taking on a towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Think about that for a moment, because here's the thing. I don't know if I've ever really looked at this. I know Jesus, this is a common story. We talk about Jesus washing feet, but it's always like, I think Jesus would have washed their feet prior, but wait a second, he didn't. So to enter the upper room without washed feet would kind of be like us walking into a restaurant today without any pants. Right? You're like, yeah, no thanks, not going to do that. That would not be customary within our culture to walk into a restaurant without any pants on. This is the same way that they would have been thinking in their head, walking in to eat without somebody washing their feet. But do you notice that no one else makes the move? None of those disciples whom journeyed with Jesus for 3 years, no, not one of them moved, said, hey, let me take the station at the door. Let me be the one who's going to stop here, and I'm going to wait for you. And I want to be the one to wash your feet. But Jesus gets up from supper. He takes the towel, puts it around his waist so that he has a towel to dry their feet once it's washed. And he walks around each one of them and he starts to wash their feet. Kind of some awkward moments at the table with dirty feet, right? Kind of those awkward moments that you're probably like, yeah, probably somebody should probably get up. Well, it's not going to be me. And yet Jesus gets up without saying a word. There's no word in the text. Jesus doesn't say, hey, you bums, you should have gotten up and somebody washed the feet. Jesus doesn't rebuke them. Jesus doesn't charge them with some crime because they didn't wash their feet coming in. Jesus, without a word, grabs the towel, wraps it around his waist, and starts walking around the table and washing each one of their feet. You see, that's the moment that they all kind of just fell silent. Because they didn't move, and yet Jesus did. Jesus took the move to become the servant. You see, and that's when our favorite bull in the china shop disciple, right? He's like, when Jesus gets to him, he's like, Jesus, you can't do that, man. Like, here's the thing. Like we follow you, Jesus. Like, you're our master. You should not be taking this role. And so Peter says, I refuse. Peter says, don't wash me because I should not be in this position. You're the master. I should be the one washing your feet. Jesus says to him, he's like, Peter, if I don't wash you, you have no part of me. See, Peter himself knows that he probably said something he shouldn't have. He came to him and he said, Lord, do you wash my feet? And Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterwards you will understand. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no share in me. And Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. You see, Jesus reveals something here that as we've been journeying together through this Lenten series of clay feet, what we see here is that Jesus is taking on another characteristic of God. Is that God says He's going to serve. And what we see in Jesus right here is Jesus is saying, I know this is customary for the servant to do this. And it was. Every household, if they couldn't afford a servant, they would have taken their kid and they would have put their kid at the door. And if they didn't have any children, it would have been the wife. Right? And if the wife wasn't there, then they would have to be the ones to serve. It was always going to kind of follow in that line. So it was always going to be the one who was there that was going to serve. And Jesus says, I'm stepping into this role because this is always the role that I was going to have. Jesus was always going to be a servant. Why? Look earlier in Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, you don't have to follow along if you don't want to, but if you want to jump over it too, you can. But Mark 10:45, this is the words from Jesus as he speaks. He tells you exactly what he's here for. He says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." You see, already early in that part of Mark in the gospel, Jesus is already trying to tell them who he is. Jesus has already outlined everything about what he's here to do. God's come to serve. He takes the place of a servant here when he says, I'm going to take the basin of water, I'm going to wash your feet, I'm going to dry them off, I'm going to make sure that all that dirt and all that grime is taken off of your feet, and you're going to be clean. But you see, Jesus also takes the form of a servant when we see that he gives of himself in the Lord's Supper. Jesus says, "This is my body, this is my blood. It's poured out for you, it's broken for you." You see, God is always trying to be able to show us what it means to be a servant. God is always trying to be able to say, I'm here to serve you. And Jesus, in his earthly ministry, never holds back. Never once does he say, finally, let me just sit back and be served for a little while. You know, like I was in heaven prior to this. I had the riches of heaven. I had everything there. And what did Jesus do? He didn't stay there because it was comfortable. He came to serve you and me. And he gave himself up for us. Go back to our text, John 13. Verse 14. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. See, here's a characteristic of God, and this is the thing that we never want to miss. Right, as we see the characteristics of God, we see the what's called the fruit of the Spirit. Have you heard of the fruit of the Spirit? And the fruit of the Spirit are what? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. So you notice that the fruit of the Spirit all originates from the character of God. Those weren't just things that God was making up and saying, well, what are the really good qualities that I'd like to see in these people? And then I'm going to send the Spirit and give them these gifts. No, it all originated from God. Every single characteristic of the fruit of the Spirit all came from God. And he said, these are the things now I want to pour into you so that you can do likewise. This Maundy Thursday, we see Jesus as a servant, and he also then says, now this is what I want you to do. I want you to carry it out. I want you to wash each other's feet, to serve each other, to love each other. Jump back to Mark real quick. Mark chapter 9, verse 35. Jesus also speaking here. And he says, as he sat down, he called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. You see, that's the same characteristic. Jesus, again, remember, Jesus has to repeat things quite a bit, doesn't he? Repetition is something that Jesus often does. He's always speaking the same thing again and again and again. It's almost like we didn't hear it the first 7 times, and then it's by the 8th time we're like, oh, Jesus, why didn't you just say that before? And Jesus is like, it's kind of like parenthood, right? As a parent, sometimes you speak things to a child and you're like, let me just tell you this. And then you tell them again. And it seems like they're looking at you. It seems like they're staring at you like in the eyes. It seems like if you could see sound waves coming out of your mouth and into their ear, it looks like it's all connecting. But then they walk away and they act like they never heard it. You see, now we know what it's like to be Jesus. You see, Jesus is speaking these things out loud to his disciples over the course of 3 years, and he was with these guys almost every single day. And it's the same things that he spoke to them when he says that he was going to be a servant. He came to serve. He came to give up his life as a ransom. And yet somehow it was a surprise to them. Somehow it was like, no, Jesus, you can't do that. Like, you can't leave. You can't go away. You can't be betrayed. When Jesus tells us to serve, he expects us to hear it and to carry it out. We need to be imitators. We need to be able to imitate the things that God has done. So as followers of Jesus, this is what followers do. This is what disciples do. Disciples do the things that their master did. And Jesus is trying to reinforce that for us by saying, here, if you didn't catch it, let me tell you again, I need you to also serve and love others. Hope you hear that. All right, let's go to Matthew real quick. Jumping around here a little bit tonight. Matthew chapter 25, verse 34. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. You see, Jesus is telling the parable, right, of the king, and the king is God. And he's saying what the followers will do is the things that they're carrying out, whether it's for the master, whether it's for the people that they see in need. We are all in need. There's no way that we can look around and say, somehow I missed somebody to serve. Somehow I missed someone to love. Because God makes a way every day. But I noticed something about this Maundy, Thursday story. There's one person who didn't have their feet washed that night. Do you know who it was? It's Jesus. Did you notice after the whole thing and after the moment, Jesus went back and he took the towel off, and it says then he returned to the table. No one jumped up and said, let me now wash your feet. And I think it's a moment that as I was trying to be able to look at it here this past week, going through this text and being able to see the things that are happening here, I believe what's happening is that Jesus is saying, I'm willing to take on your grime, your dirt, your sin, your guilt. It's all taken on me. And that's really what Holy Week is all about. The journey that we make with Jesus and being able to see the things that Jesus is doing, hearing the words that Jesus is speaking. Jesus is taking on our guilt, our shame, our sin. No one else could have taken it. No one else could have done that job. No one else would have stepped up into that position. Jesus did. You see, Jesus came to serve. And the way that he was serving was he was also saying, I'm here to take on your guilt, shame, and sin. I'm here to die in your place. Jesus lays down his life for us.